So thanks for everybody coming. I know you guys, some people had quite a good trip yesterday with the freezing rain and all that, but it looks like, actually I haven't counted if everybody's here, but I don't think everybody wanted to made it.
Thomas Watson is still lost in transaction.
Maybe till 11 o'clock, but hopefully 11 o'clock. I'm thinking we can start out with a little bit of our proposed agenda, but maybe before we do that, we should all kind of introduce ourselves, because I'm not sure that everybody has met before. So maybe let's just spend a few minutes going around doing that. We can then, I think, go through the agenda to make sure that it's still the things we want to go through, and then once we've done that, we can dive into it. There's coffee and tea over here. And the bathrooms are just sort of around, go out, and to your left, they're over through there. You have to actually go through a set of doors, but you can't get back.
There's a big red button that says push the red button. Don't push the red
button. It's already, right?
Yeah, it's a lie.
It's a lie, okay.
It's
really tempting.
Hi, I'm Michael Gosling from IBM. I'm IBM's Node.js lead. And I'm chair of the TSC, active in a bunch of working groups, and just overall active.
I'm Daniel Khan. I'm looking at the external phase, and there are responsible for Node.js as well. And I started that 3 years ago as Node.js subject matter expert.
I'm Andreas Massey. I primarily do HTML hooks. I've been doing that for some years. For developer, like many of you. I recently started at Neoform, where we're developing my code clinic. And that's one more.
I'm René Chandra, and I'm the Node Chopper guy here. So I work on Node Chakra primarily, and work with the community on the NAPI work. So where my interest here is to kind of also advance that conversation of an API and via diversity for a diagnostic initiative as well. So that's the things that are up here.
Michael Kaufman, I'm from Microsoft. What do I work on? A variety of different things, some of them node related.
I'm Mark Marin. I'm from Microsoft Research. Mainly, I've been working sort of focused on the time travel debugging components in Chakra Core and Node Chakra Core. But more generally, I'm interested in just diagnostics and diagnostics tools.
I'm Matheus Martini. I'm a developer at Schema. I've been working on post-mortem debugging on Node.js and most recently on profiling tools for Node.js.
Hi, I am Matteo Collina. I am a TSC member, and I've been in Neoform for like more than 4 years now. In a kind of a journey. I'm here mostly as users of all the diagnostic stuff. In that regard, I have been fixing a lot of performance and production issues at client in the last 4 years. So I am trying to bring that perspective into this conversation.
Cool. Everybody, Dan Shaw. I'm a member of the ComCom. In the ComCom, I kicked off a group called User Feedback. Generally, around plugged into the Node project. Here representing Neoform, and my sort of involvement here is kind of the weird businessy person, and one of the main things that I hope to bring to the table is connecting the dots between what we identify here to make sure that we can bring the resources to bear that we need to go and actually accomplish that. So I'll be looking at how what we decide to do tracks back to various corporate goals, and hopefully we'll take this and develop out some really great standards for Node users everywhere.
Hi, I'm Joy Chang. I am a TSC member, and I've been doing some maintenance work on Node lately. So this one here, I'm here mainly to discuss about the postmortem diagnostic stuff.
James Snell, Nearform and TSC. They work on Node Core all the time.
Sure. So hi, I'm Simon Kagi. I'm actually not a member of this working group, but I have worked on JavaScript. I'm a member of TC39, although as I was involved in the S6 and 2016. But I'm not very involved anymore there. I work on something like called the pipeline, which is like Circus CI. My interest is actually in debuggers and debug wire protocols. I worked on Eclipse for ages before, and we're doing some efforts trying to standardize debug wire protocols, and that ended up going nowhere. But I'm really still very interested.
Yeah, my name is Jan Krebs. I work at Groupon. Work there on the web platform team, so I spend a lot of time helping people build node services and help understand when the node services break. This is what brought me working on the node command line debugger and now on modules. Very interested in anything that can help find out why programs break. So that's my.
I'm Calvin. I'm from Google. I work on stack average rates. I'm here primarily with discussion.
My name is Yang. I've been working on the team for quite a while, mostly on debugger, tooling. Most recently also on Node. Yeah.
My name is Ali. I work at Google. I'm also on Node. And I have been interested and involved with diagnostics from early years when I started working on it. So yeah, I'm quite interested in diagnostics.
Jeremiah Singfield. I'm Node.js TSC member, and I do engineering and open source at Node Source. And we make like monitoring tools, so that's okay.
I'm Franziska Hinkelmann from Google in Germany, like Jan, working on V8 on the TSC, interested in the CPU profiler.
Hi, I'm Peter Martin, and I work for Netflix, where we are working on a Node.js-based platform for internal customers, and I have mainly performance monitoring and syntax management.
I'm Gershwin, working at the Node.js, and then working on the Node.js on the application. Hi, I'm Kenneth Reising. I'm also working for Dynatrace in Austria. I'm also on the Node.js team, working recently on a feature called ambient sampling, which uses the C2 profiler. So I have a very general interest in the stuff that we are using with Node.js, and I also do part-time also the Go agent with some other colleagues.
Okay, well, thanks for everybody for coming. And I think now at this point we should probably go through our agenda just to read it. That's something still the sort of flow we want to follow, and then dive in. So we're already sort of a partial of the way through. We've arrived settled in, done some introductions. The next thing on the schedule is a short end user perspectives. Netflix suggested be a good way for us to start out understanding some of the problems and issues that the end users are in. So I assume, Peter, you're going to take that?
Yes.
Okay. Following that, actually, reversing the order here, but the end of the agenda review. The next session then was planned to start to talk about postmortem, so identify some of the main issues, some of the main priorities that we can then get into in the later breakout sessions. Have a bit of a break, then go through monitoring, debugging, and I'd similarly identify the priorities and issues in each of those different areas. Then talk about platform neutrality and APIs. So there's been discussion about, are there different places we be putting in platform neutral APIs to support, diagnostics, monitoring, post-mortem models, different things. And then finally, ending up with testing and documentation, which is an area that maybe we could use some more testing and documentation. So again, talk about how we might do that. Then have lunch coming in at 12. And then when we come back, we can do a breakout session. We can actually, there's nobody else in the briefing center today, so there's another room we can break out to if we want to have 2 parallel sessions, so we can decide whether we want to be together or not 2. And actually, we could even do 3 because the lunchroom is not huge, but probably could fit about 10 people. So we can decide how we do that once we get through the initial discussions. After the breakouts, we have a demo from James and Mateo.
I think.
I'm James Mateo. Yeah. I'm James.
Oh, so okay.
Yeah.
So you're going to okay. We can edit that. Where you edit yourself in there. I have made a reservation for the pub dev suite for 25 people. We're each on our own to pay for it, but I could use confirmation. Last I checked, there was like 14 people that said they were going to come. Maybe I should just ask if there anybody who's not going to. Okay, so I'll call them and say, yeah, the numbers were accurate. It's within walking distance, although I don't know if everybody has coats, so I can shuttle people back and forth if you don't want to walk down. And day 2, basically just scheduled the morning to have a couple more breakout sessions, followed by lunch coming in again here, and then finish up the afternoon and the session by doing a review of the discussions we've had in the breakout sessions. Hopefully bring back the discussion conclusions and define our concrete actions in terms of what are we going to do going forward to push forward each of the initiatives that we've been talking about. And that's what's on the agenda. So are there any other things that people want to put onto the agenda?
I was wondering if it made sense to put the demo before the breakout, because there's a lot of discussion about issues and challenges we are facing with the project developing, which would be nice for the breakouts.
So like first thing after lunch?
Yeah, that's fine.
Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, well, I wonder if it's going to just sort of inform some of the discussion prior to that. Do we want to just move it up, like have Netflix talk for 10 minutes and you can do your demo? How long is the demo going to take? Does that throw things off, or does that seem fair?
I'm okay with that.
Doesn't matter.
Okay, well, yeah, sure. Then why don't we move that to sort of as another thing that's going to form our discussion.
Now your times are all wrong.
That's, yeah, well,
You move the post-mortem review after lunch, the times will be right.
There you go.
Mostly right.
Anyway, as long as we roughly have the items, we'll figure out the time.
As long as we get lunch, everything else sorts itself.
Yeah, I think lunch will come one way or the other. I've set it for a particular time, so it's going to show up. The tea and coffee show
Go through the agenda first before you get lunch.
That's right.
I don't know the see people having this possible or some sections.
Yeah, I think
so.
Some of the things, like, I think there's a breakout, some of the different
Yes.
things here that we can talk in more detail, and if people see things that are missing or they want to change stuff around, you should speak up when you go detail. It's individual agenda items. There is
Right.
more-
So this is the more detailed. Maybe we should just take a quick look to make sure it's. I don't think it falls under secret profiling. Probably doesn't fall under post-mortem.
I think it's on monitoring.
Okay, so let's just double check that. Right.
There's profiling.
Profiling. So we just have profiling. I guess CPU. I'll. Maybe heat. That? Maybe heat. Heat. Sure. Okay. Any other things people want to make sure are on the agenda?
I'm going to do a update on our node.
Okay. So that's definitely fits under postmortem. So let's see. So we've got that. Current tools, LL node. Let's just say LL node. Okay. That's a good point. Okay. So we will move monitoring for first, like he said, he'd be here by 11. Down there.
I think it was at 12.
Yeah, it was delayed.
Okay. Well, here, we'll actually, we'll do it at the end of the day, of the morning. No, not by then. And how far we get, who knows, things may run over. We already pushed things, so maybe we can be out. Okay, any other suggestions, updates? You can always, it's not final, of course, if you think of something that may jump in.
Where would the topic of ethical context propagation?
Under monitoring,
yeah, that's my understanding.
Right, so we have monitoring async context propagation. Any others?
Do you want me to adjust the times of things so they fit in order between lunch and everything, like in this order?
Yeah, if you want to go through and do that while we're going through, great. Okay, if that's it for the agenda for now, let's move on to the starting, which is again user expectation perspectives. I can should be able to plug in there. Try that
Okay. So, hello everyone, I'm Diagnostic. Today I would like to talk about diagnostic challenges that face metrics, and I would like to summarize the state of the story and what is available for the challenges what we are facing. And I would like to point out unfortunately that evolving compromise. And probably you are wondering that where is Yuan, because usually he gives the diagnostic talks from Netflix, and just got a baby last Thursday, so that's why. So to put our challenge to context, we have 170 million members, and we are streaming 140 million hours content to our members daily. And what's really important for us today is that the Netflix next generation API is powered by Node.js. And here I would like to stop for a moment and thank you for everyone in this room and the Node.js community to make it possible that we can use Node.js today on such a huge scale. So thank you. And diagnostic matters, why it's really important for us and why we believe it's important for others in the community as well. First of all, the customer experience. So we are really keen about the good availability and keeping the fast user experience and latency of customers. So diagnostic is really important for us to get to them performance bottlenecks. Also, in such an innovative environment, it's really important to give developer-friendly tools for developers, which allows them to focus on the features rather than having protection issues. And the third thing that lots of performance optimization happens in Node, and finding performance bottlenecks is also important because in such a huge scale, even 1% optimization is a huge cost saving for us. And how do we target the root cause production issues today. Take symptom like a latency spike. If we dive deeper in the metric system, that maybe we can realize that it's all happening because of the high CPU. And this is the point when we would like to go deeper. And today we are using the for generated performance graph. I mean flame graphs. And why it's really important for us that this is the Linux perform is because it gives us full observability. So we are using native models like gRPC, have a link collection. So only the JavaScript frames are not enough for us. For example, other example from recent past that one team at Matrix successfully hunt down spectrum meltdown related performance bottlenecks with C-scores in flame graphs. So for us, it's really important to have a full observability. And let's see the available tools today for CPU profiling. So one thing that I have already mentioned, the Linux graph tools, which you can available with flag in Node.js and full observability. So we see the JavaScript, V8, and native things as well. It has some tooling. This tooling is in the white. But sadly, it's no cross-platform, so it only works on Linux, and it's broken in the current version of Node.js. And it's basically really bad for us because we stuck with Node.js v6. So we can't have all the great features of the latest Node.js, the async away, the profile and the ignition. And so it's really blocking for us right now. Other tool is the -Pro. In a V8, which gives visibility from JavaScript frames and the last C++ frames. So we are losing some observability here, but the good thing that this is a cross-platform tool and it's supported things. And another one, which I just got today, the new background is really similar to -Pro. It's CPU profiler for Chrome. I think this is a tool that's used by most of the JavaScript users. Sadly, it only gives visibility about JavaScript code, but it has a great tooling. It's in Chrome for a while. Many people are familiar with this. So I would say that I feel that there is an opportunity for us that giving a tool that's cross-platform. Node.js is one of the fastest growing ecosystem today, and many of you using Windows, another one using OS X for development. Most of the people are using Linux production. So I think we are looking for something that that works in all of these cases. And I would definitely bet on full observability because there are many native models, mainly the database drivers, gRPC library. So this is definitely something that's just Node.js developer friendly. Think about all the new developers who is joining Node.js ecosystem. And for them, I think the Linux work is way more complicated. So I think we should give them a tool that's not just giving them full observability and cross-platform, but which is accessible for even new developers. Sorry, can you resolve your questions?
Sure.
Okay. And I think it's a key that we need a tool that is supported in the long term. Be sure that this is not just working in V8, V10, but it's also going to work well. And how do we identify memory issues today? This is another challenge which you face quite frequently at Netflix. And if you see a pattern like this, the process has a continuously going memory, then at point it runs out of memory and crashes, then obviously your customers are already affected because you are using some request, your garbage collector works more frequently, so it also has an effect on latency. And let's see what tools are available. And one thing is, I think it's most painful picking random commits. It's not even possible always. If you have code in production, which is doing features and can tweak it and develop an experience. But you can use the Chrome memory snapshot. Sensing that it's mainly useful in development environment because it has quite huge memory requirement collection, which you usually don't have available in the production system. So if you don't want to crash your process, then probably you can. And there is a core dump, which we use today. You can analyze core dumps in V8 or Node. It has a low memory footprint, so it really works in post-production development environment, and it's also possible to use it for post-content debugging. So when your application crashes, then you can get automatically generated bottoms, you can analyze them later, which is a really great feature. But also, DBB only has the terminal interface. So I think these are great tools, but for new developers, I think these are very common. So again, I think for memory profiling, we are looking at something that's cross-platform, developer-friendly, gives the full observability, and supporting long-term by both Node.js. And why I think these points are really important for us, because we are all working to make Node.js the best production with the enterprise with runtime, and really achieve that goal. I think this is important to give accessible tools that gives the right amount of observability, even for large Node.js deployments. And Netflix is happy to help. We already started to talk with people. We are sending pull requests, commits. Here I would like to highlight Matthias, who is basically sending commits for Netflix. And some of you have already seen that you all put together a roadmap to address the CPU profiling sort of plan, and how we can basically have a CPU profiler that what the great features. So again, diagnostic matters, because full observability in production is a key to run a successful business, and for new developers and for developers who have a wide Node.js ecosystem, I think it's important to use the databases. So thank you for your attention. I just wanted to give this quick introduction with what challenges we are facing and what we would like to, what we think is important for the system to achieve as longer term goal. Sorry, you had a question.
Yeah, sure. So I mean, you say full observability a lot, but like, are you really like let's say GC is eating most of your time. Do you really care which method in V8's GC is eating a lot of that time, or do you more want like it's not my JavaScript code, it's the GC, or it's not my JavaScript code, it's the database driver?
At this point, we have so later we would like to do more performance optimization. So I can imagine that we also need to have a durable GC, but at the moment we are more interested to have the native in native. So we are using some library from MPM, which we use as protocol to communicate with other services. Yeah.
I think the question basically boils down to how granular do you want the native frame to be? Do you just need like categories, or do you actually need the function names in C++? Because you could achieve the same with tracing methods if you only want the general category of where.
Yeah, but you are making the you are speaking about trace events like groups, or so yeah, manually inserted groups in the code.
So it's already exists in V8. They're available in the trace event. I forget the name of the flag. I think it is. There's a flag that enables trace events that writes all these internal operations within V8. So when you go into GC, you make that trace event. And then when you finish GC, you can another trace. So that gives you an idea of where that time will be.
But something like GC, you need actual instrumentation.
Yeah.
Like you would need probes in every native library.
Yeah, so I guess the question boils down to what's for different types of things, what is the granularity you want, right? So you care about granularity in the VM. You care about, so if you write a native module or you have some other native module, you care that I'm spending time in this native module, or whether I want to know which function is in gRPC, which is probably not as relevant. I guess there's a case that can be made for full granularity because ultimately somebody wants that, but not all users will want it. So I guess the question is, how do you at the same time make the information consumable?
Yeah, but at that point you're kind of already, like if you say that everyone wants to have the gRPC breakdowns, you can data for every single output and not modules, right? So I don't think there's a fundamental difference between if it's a native frame or JS frame, or it might be third-party code.
Another question. What kind of scale is this particular frame graph? Is that a second?
Oh, it's I'm not even sure if it's from Netflix.
Okay.
So yeah, it's just an example.
Because that really influences which kind of profiler you use. CPU profiler is not all that granular.
Yeah, and back to your previous question, it's really hard to tell that was the right amount of observability. Because maybe for the gRPC issue, it would be enough to have less observability. But in the past, like I mentioned, the map aspect thing, we have seen use cases when it's hard to have the right.
So when you typically run the flame graphs tools, but also other type of things, what's your typical workflow? So you enable it on all the machines, you enable it on certain specific boxes.
We enable it on certain stuff.
For what's the time duration you typically observe this data?
Depends on the issue, but I would say it's only for a couple of minutes, hours.
Yeah, that's a very important question for a lot of people, because when you design these type of things, then the amount of data that is being generated might be.
Yeah, I didn't point it out that basically here, so the basic graph is sample based, but I think it's the main point here, and the Chrome C3 profiler is more like tracing based, so it's collects heavy information, which is more useful if you're looking for edge cases in specific requests. But if you would like to see a bigger picture, like for the bottleneck, then the sampling based approaches.
That's not entirely true. All of those are sampling based. It's just that basic prof is triggered by the model, and the other two have essentially the same implementation. In the end, we have a thread that triggers sigprof every millisecond, I think. And we then have a signal handler that collects the stack in the end, which makes it different from the perf, because in the perf, the kernel works the same.
Probably should wait to dive into the details until we get into the section on one. If there's anything else you wanted to point out from like the Netflix use case or questions about that?
So first off, Peter, great slides. I hope you can share this, at least internally, if not to the summit. Great overview. Question for folks here. With the snapshot of state of CPU and state of memory profiling, what's missing? Like, I noted, LO node is kind of not, it doesn't appear to be in your stack.
That's the core dump.
It's a core dump, okay.
Yeah, I will make one comment. So if you go back a few slides, I think you can make an argument that full observability and developer friendly are sort of at odds with each other, right? And at some point, like at Netflix scale, you want that. Joe JavaScript doesn't.
I'm not necessarily showing that because image in the Chrome C3 compiler where you can just disable and enable all the rest of the thing graphs, then I think it's cool for it.
But is
I
it
mean,
full
that is not
observability?
I'm saying that it's not too complicated for those who doesn't need the full observability, but it's still there for those companies. But I don't see that they have opposite.
Yeah, just what I'm wondering, take away from it is maybe a little bit right now broken. So the thing that the system should be stay broken. Is there a way going forward fixing that, or will that can be covered in breakouts? But with regards to tooling, in fact, there is something there what doesn't work anymore.
This is probably a good segue into the agenda stuff, and we can dive into the postmortem agenda. And I mean, I think one of the useful things, what do we want to walk away from with the postmortem agenda? I think understanding which of these tools need to be maintained and how that happens.
Yeah, you agree, because the biggest challenge right now that basically we need some alignment between create it and we can move it. So even if we spend time, money, energy to build the right tool, then it should work in the next version of the node and version of the thing. So I think this is why it's really important today or in the future, at least have the alignment of what we need and how we would like to achieve.
Yeah, I think you're right that that's going to be one of the key things we talk about with the section 4.
Yeah. So if you go to memory profiling, it includes the sampling heap profiler.
Which one?
Sampling heap profiler?
Because I don't know.
Okay.
Nobody knows it. I didn't know that until last week.
Okay, well, I guess we should do a better job communicating that one.
Honestly, at memory, I think the core dump is a really great way. Just we need to be sure that LR node is the way and the LR node.
So there's this thing in the middle, and I think nobody knows about it. I guess we should figure out how do we tell developers about that this thing exists?
You can tell us.
Why?
Yeah, okay. So I guess the next thing on the agenda is the demo.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thanks, man.
This that one? Yeah, yeah. Always. Yeah.
All right. Hello, my name is Matthew James. I'm here to talk about Clinic. So Clinic is a new initiative from Nearform that I've been working on for the last 4 months. It's publicly available, some of it, through install Clinic, but it's like an ongoing process. And so what Clinic is a toolbox for diagnosing performance issues. The reason why we did this is because what they do in Nearform is that people have a slow server, and then they struggle for a few months, cannot really find a solution. Then they call Nearform or somebody else. We send the real material, and then within a couple of days fix the issues, and they have a fast server. And what we see in other kind of languages is that they have a slow server, then they apply a profiling tool, and then they get a fast server. So this is like a much more effective in those kind of things. It's not that we don't have these tools in Node.js, but we don't see the same effectiveness. And so I think the reason why this is the case is that Node.js is just more difficult. And the reason why this is because of this asynchronous execution model. Right, so this creates a whole new set of issues that we are not used to dealing with. Like we have an event loop, we don't have that asynchronous. And that can be blocked. It's called all requests can be blocked. So this is like a new type of issue. If you're waiting for I/O, then there's non-blocking, so it doesn't appear on the stack. And so you cannot just sample the CPU stack in order to see where the time is spent. You have to come up with something much more clever, which is typically console time start, time end. This doesn't really work. And then memory is shared between all requests. So this means that we have much more complex memory graphs, and if you have like stop the world gap detection event happening, then that's much more damaging because it ends up stopping all the requests. So this means that we have new type of issues, meaning that we need other types of program tools. And all this causes a big confusion for the user because what they have is they don't know anything, they don't know any of the tools, and they don't know any of the issues, and they just know they have a problem. So what they need to do is that they need to learn all the different types of issues, then they need to learn all the different types of debugging tools, and then they need to try them one by one and guess what's going to work and what's not going to work. And even worse, like most of these tools, they're not very easy to use. They can be a bunch of command line flags from Node.js that prints out what one of my old professors called the message view, where you just see like a bunch of numbers running on the screen. Right. So Clinic Doctor is a part of this toolbox. It takes a slow server, you apply the doctor, and then it gives you an analysis that says what type of issue it is. Based on that, it gives you a recommendation for what tool to use to fix it. It doesn't actually tell you how to fix it specifically, it just tells you what tool to use next. Then you use that tool, and then hopefully you can get a task server. The second part here is where we are at now and what we're trying to do. Right, so this is my queue for a demo. It's very small. Right. Two of them actually. And then I have some examples. So you right click, doctor, dash, then whatever you would normally type. So I have a IO example here. Simulates.
Attention in the building with the owner of a black Nissan, license plate number BWCK092. Please remove your vehicle from parking spot 11. Thank you.
Thank you too.
That happens like once every 6 months. So.
Okay. I'll be right back.
All right. So you start that with just start the server and add some stations, and then you profile that. Right. So now we just send a bunch of requests. It takes seconds in my practice. So I'm going to get the water here. Right, then you stop it, Control C, analyze the data. This. So, yeah. And it says to take that potential IO issue because the simulation is from database. So it's an IO issue. And it does this by looking at CPU usage. As he said, it's very low. You're not really spending time executing things, you must be spending time waiting on things. Our analysis actually gets more advanced. As you can see here, it only analyzes part of it. This is because it's slow at running AutoCAD, so it automatically figures out what parts to analyze, what's relevant. And then it has this recommendation here, Dr. found potential IO issue, and then it says the simplest current approach to solve this problem is by reasoning about external infrastructure. This is not very helpful. Because for IO issues, we don't really have any kind of tool. So this inspires the next part. This is about the prof. So Bubble Prof is this fellow who will help you solve your IO issues. Find out where time is spent waiting. We do this using hooks. What we do is we collect timing information, then we log those using trace bits, something I implemented into Node Core, as this is reasonably efficient. And then we also collect stack traces, and we save them using a Spotify. This is then the second part. So if you run the slow IO example and just visualize the data directly, right. Then you get this monster, and the button is the devil. Here, each row here is a single asynchronous operation happening in Node.js. There's a lot of them. You can zoom in on tiny bits and then really see those many. As this is not very helpful, what you see is just a timeline. It's like way too much information for anyone. But each line here, you can see the stack queries were posted. This is not a bubble prop. The reason why is this complicated is because we see every single repetition of every single request, and even if you didn't see that, then there's a lot of like next ticks, Node.js that we're not really interested in. Right. So what bubble prop do is it takes the asynchronous stack trace for each of these operations, and then if those are matching, then it aggregates them into the same data. Right. So you can simply transform it like this. Of course, as I said, it's much more complicated. What's really happening is this. A database is not just a database query, it's like 500 next ticks and then information. But what we then want to do with bubble prop is that we want to cluster these operations, some heuristics, such that we actually have a representation of the database. So I'll give you a bit more demo, but we're not quite done with bubble prop yet. But it works exactly the same, plain bubble prop, like so full doctor, and the profile is exactly the same. This I think is really important, and it's like a central strategy that we're doing with cleaning. Once you learn one tool, it should be easy for you to learn the next tool. Because you cannot get around there being many tools, because they have many issues. And we don't really think it's realistic that we create one tool that just solves everything. But what we should at least do is to make sure that once you build one tool, it's easy to learn the other. So what we showed before is not initialization. This is initialization. So what we can see here is that we have circles that represent asynchronous time spent, and then we have the lines that represents asynchronous waiting time. And here we can then see that we have.
Can we turn off the lights because nobody can see anything?
Oh, okay.
Better.
All right.
Thank you.
No sleeping.
Constant time. Lines that is the asynchronous waiting time. And what we can then see is, like relatively speaking, a lot of time spent waiting for the database. This is exactly what you want to see. Now this was made by a designer with like a bit of node knowledge. So like the time being spent on FS graph is not very realistic. What you typically see is maybe spent on like DNS lookup or FS requests. In this case, you want to hash your DNS or your config files, or maybe the time is spent using just on a TCP connection. And then you could look into if you hash the amount of database queries. But just knowing that it's that database and it's that query is quite relevant. So you can then investigate further here, see how the time is spent in using these clusters here. You can also go into a cluster and see the details of that. And then you can see that they have a lot of next ticks. In fact, like one of our developers, Matthias, not that familiar with Node core, but he saw that we had a lot of next ticks in streams, for example. Then he was actually able to optimize that a bit to get more performance out of stream and using exactly this kind of data. We don't expect most people to use this at detail level. Like for most people, it will be enough to just know that the database is slow. But this will be very interesting for like module authors who might run one. Then you can see stack trace. What caused these operations here? This is really where the big issue in Node.js is that it is very expensive. So here I have a very basic TCP server that just prints its own file. Something I like to do. You can see here with no logging, it's quite fast on my 4 or 5-year-old laptop. It's like 5,000 requests per second. But if we enable stack traces, if we use speed trace, for example, then we're making probe events in async groups. That's also quite fast. The problem is that you need to like hack your kernel on macOS to do it. So that's not really a valuable strategy. Not really the strategy. Then I also try to implement like a data module to do this that just walks the frame pointers and stack. That's also quite fast. Again, like the problem also with these traces is that we cannot really turn that into a meaningful stack trace. Then if you just do your stack, this is what we do now, then you can see it's like slows down to then it slows down to like 500 requests per second, which is quite horrible. If you collect the timing information, which we're also using, then it's about the same. Do it the NAU way, using the right. Use trace events, and then it's a little bit faster, but actually not that much. And the reason why this is because we have these like literally 10,000 next ticks in Node core. And for each of these next ticks, you need to call a plus function in order to log through trace events. So that really slows things down. So what we sort of found is that like we need faster trace events logging. Not really very satisfying what we have right now. And we also have a lot of issues with trace events not being signal safe. So when you press Control C, then it can sometimes break. This is like a big technical challenge because it involves some threads that needs to be logged. You cannot really do that in signal handler. Then we need faster stack traces. I think it's probably the biggest problem right now because I mean you can imagine if you combine both the timing and the stack traces, then you really get down to like 100 requests per second. And the problem with this is when you're searching for bottleneck, then you're suddenly introducing a whole new bottleneck by doing all this kind of logging. And so then you're sort of missing that bottleneck that you're actually trying to find. What would be nice to have, which I think the data providers really also want to have, is some information about these external modules. Right now, we use heuristics, see if something is a database. It would be nice to know that it's a database, and even better to know what kind of query the user ran. But it's not like the highest performance points. All right, so this morning I got a new demo from my UI. I hope we're turn that off. Oh, I cannot turn it off. That's bad. Right, so this is our slow I/O example. So where we actually collect the data is actually doing visualization. So what you can see here is this one of it. Is this red line here? That's the timeouts. That's how I simulate a slow database. But it's quite clear that that is where the time is spent. This is exactly what we wanted to see. And we can hover these, and then we can see some of the stack traces. So we are iterating a bit on how this should look. And of course, you can like zoom in. This is not supported in UI. Then you really get the details. Yeah. That's all. So this is like. Questions?
Not a question. So you think? Really cool.
Yeah.
Is it an open source project or a product?
Yes.
Open source. So Clinic is already available. Everybody can use it. But Clinic Docker is. We also have ZeroX, which is a link graph tool integrated into it. And then we're adding buffer prof, but we haven't added buffer prof yet. That's still a secret.
well, it's not so much secret. It's more not done. Like it's literally what you have just seen was not there 3 days ago. So that's.
Yeah, I was just asking, like, when we're in the conversations.
It will be Apache. It will be released on Apache 2 in as soon as it's in a more shareable form. It has been a kind of a ride to get here at this point.
So yeah, the entire point is for it not to be a product. It's open source project. We want to build a community around this.
Thank you.
Thanks. Thanks, Andres.
Yes. Yeah, so this is So this is meant to run on the developer's machine, or maybe you have a server that you just test on. It's not meant to kick off monetization. Like our initial thought is that's more for the EVM providers to do, what we don't want to know as EVM provider. But at some point we might expand it into do that. But it's a pretty big challenge, and we don't really feel like that's a challenge we want to tackle right now.
There is one more thing I want to add related to the flame graph part. That we integrated our previous tool called 0x in called Clinic Flame. It's one thing we are adding there. It's a support for to work only on top of --prof from V8, so that you can provide that easy to use developer experience for that as well. Also something that works very well in a cross-platform way, because that's been a huge problem in the past. So that is a pull request landing soon. So
in that slide where you have the list of data is expensive, right? This one. You're listing several different ways to collect data, right? Do you have a way to sort of unify this information somehow to collect them, or are they just each by its own standalone?
Well, so we use the async IDs of async groups to combine the timing data with stack trace data. That's how we combine that data. Yeah, and then it's just a lot of graphs to process.
So sorry, if you go forward, where's your? So is this effectively like, if you were to have a set of asks, this is your set of asks?
Yes.
Okay. And then is this stuff tracked in sort of the current agenda list that we're going through, or I guess
it's tracked. It's not like this specific.
What's that?
This weekly track is not this specific.
Okay.
What you're saying is you're not talking about trace bits becoming significant. You're talking about trace bits.
Yeah, I guess my point is you should make sure that this is reflected in sort of the conversations of
the monitoring section.
The monitoring and/or the some of this I thought was going to go through the postmortem. I thought the trace events was listed in the postmortem stuff, but and if there's breakouts that are split, you guys may want to have one person in each to kind of ensure your point of view are represented.
I'd like to sort of comment on, I see a slightly larger theme emerging too in your first bullet point. I think this pops up elsewhere. There are a number of things that want to write data to some diagnostic stream, and sometimes they write it from native code, and sometimes they write it from JavaScript code. And not having a unified way to do this is expensive if you're bouncing back and forth across these boundaries. It seems like sort of a larger topic is there some sync that we can write data to, whether we're in JavaScript or native, that can batch or do it efficiently or not have it split across both layers and be a cleaner, simpler, more unified solution?
Yeah, I think my experience is it's gonna be hard to do better than trace events, but it still needs a lot of work on the JavaScript side.
Let me just say hey, by the way, I'd like to use the trace events, and if I'm on native, I can flush immediately, or if I'm in JavaScript, I can timestamp, batch, and then do a large write and make sure I get it in the consistent order when I do the flush kind of thing. I mean, I don't know.
We talked about that. I think that's a good thing. I have thought about that as well. So I think that's a good topic to dive into. I don't think you like that.
Yeah, but I think it's a larger theme that I see coming up across.
Yeah, I just added that into the monitoring detail thing. Something coming out of this we should talk about.
Thanks. Okay. Then can you just grab the light there?
Sure.
Yeah. Okay, so as per our agenda, we're at 10:15. So we started a little bit late, but we're gonna have a break and then come back and dive into one of the sections. Does that still make sense to everybody? Okay. So let's say we'll come back at 10:30.
Next actually is cache them at all.
It's not possible
not
to
for
do.
the one in JavaScript, but what we do is that so our plugin guys find out all the and the way
What's a great word?
that was our
That's another.
and what we do is we create a structure section.
Yeah, there you go. Yeah. Yeah, because as far as I am excited about like actually getting not just my friends, not everybody, getting all my rotation.
I think one of the two that's the
Is getting
I might be able to use CSS or grid box.
Yeah, that's about what I did too.
Oh, thank you.
Wow.
I love it. I'm calling something. I know how painful it is for everybody. And some time ago I decided not to go for that process. Okay, but I know
Right, so that's still again, you're waiting to respond.
Right?
And they'll be the followers.
Yeah, it's fine. Yeah, that's why I absolutely no. Yeah, I know how bad that is hurting. So like I went through the decision moment of not doing it. So it's quite painful for myself.
So this is where I live.
I am still I work on that.
I work on something called the pipeline. Oh.
Oh yeah. Oh my god.
Yeah, well, it's actually one nice thing. Yeah, thank you because it has been at the outpost of we did I don't know if
probably are familiar with the concept of design sprint.
And I've
I hope so. We have run one on this tooling. Internally, we found one of our designers because we do that for all of the customers. So we brought in one of our designers, and myself, Andreas, and Connor, our chief product officers, sits in our lab for kind of a week, trying to figure out how to improve the tooling.
Group of like hyper detail oriented.
Oh, okay.
That's one way of putting it. Yeah.
I'm required.
No. Yeah. And there's real characters in there. So, egos and
Most recently on Bloomberg.
They were. We were talking about side issues on warm ones.
This is very. Yeah, we was talking about that.
She was saying that normally it's like minus 30.
Trying to that we had Ravens on the doing this now. It was really cool.
So you're over.
Yeah.
You're over.
There's like the protect to collect all this.
Right, and I think one of the reasons is that we built it up for values. There's just no way to walk.
Maybe so.
Where are you?
Because you would have to then walk information or reuse those. There's no lot of information you can write. You can, I think, have it available online. That's way more valuable. It will be a lot easier.
What's his face?
I think on Node it's just ready.
Have you ever?
So we actually think
Otherwise, I feel bad too. I forgot Jay's on the like I think I know. Remember all the OTIs, but no, he was never really.
Yeah, that was
I actually consider it a good thing that my IBM knowledge is stating
it's part of the.
IBM work on that. Always working. Then I see.
I mean, I actually get out here.
It's funny that I think it's on the places now. Sorry? With your phone. My God. Okay. Prototype probably.
I would recommend.
That's right. Yeah.
And I started with Nearform.
It's like 3 miles.
That was like my big claim was maybe I could trick James into representing this.
He's not about for a while.
They're all. Yes, they don't know.
Yeah, I don't think we need to get taught to do is wires.
I would do it if they would let me dedicate. They certainly. They're doing so well. Have this other delicious lemon.
But it's sounds like kind of
The organization is in charge of resources. So, right, he's supposed to be.
that's why we actually cut
So you made it. I saw your thing, like I made it to Toronto, and then I looked at it, like Toronto or cancel.
No, I thought it was and then all the flights back to Fresno were like leaving while I was waiting for confirmation that I didn't be able to make it out.
But yeah, I feel we lost one person.
What happened to Colin?
Colin, good point. He's in town.
He's in town. Yeah.
He's in town?
That is a good question.
Yeah, I was gonna give Scott a hard time. I was like, all right, you keep saying that your joint has some issues in the direction of things. Like, you gotta show up to sessions where
You're right. I saw you. Like I saw a tweet saying, like, who would have predicted this to be a disaster?
Yeah, get him over here.
We're wondering where you are. Yeah, really. I didn't come to talk to you guys. Yeah, you never did.
Maybe he's at the other IBM office. Someone's got him in the sales queue.
I have no idea what Connie
But I don't have a, I don't think I don't have a picture of.
To access memory and stuff like that.
It's being quite a push. It has been quite a push.
Yeah. Actually, everybody like that.
You ever been down in the yeah, I know. I was like, they said you can go to this. Is that up on the 10th floor? I went there once, and like 10th floor was like palatial.
Yeah. You're like,
it's like,
yeah. Well, that's like when we have this.
Yeah.
There we go.
Yeah, because I'm
Oh yeah. So I think
sort I knew all the guys before, and that's how I sort of like got in, because it's like it's a challenge that I think they're very detailed around it. I need to have a lot of the
I know there's a lot of shit.
There is, yeah. So that's so I was there for I was there for Cality as well. But I wasn't. So yeah, ES6. So they're trying to do this stuff.
Yeah, I'm from here.
Never seen what? Never seen it. Well, I think
Otherwise, I don't know how you do too many information. We are adding.
had a little bit of a say in it.
I think that's great.
Every 6 weeks. Okay. But then there's also they're all face to face. Right. And so it's like we were looking like we put it up and got feedback and engineering something. So that's might also really came out and you really need how big a group you still have questions. You can just like share code. I don't know. Yeah, yeah, it's 27 in this if you use the couch. 4 years. Probably won't ever do that. To write a DSL. Yeah, you have to do that. I think easier to make nearly everybody yeah,
So part of this comes from
somebody that's like just by people like everybody.
Oh, I look at how the battery is going.
I think I actually I don't know that much. Look at the code.
Yeah,
everybody, we're at 10:30, so we should probably start to get back to 10:30.
Where did I go? Trying to build it.
Yeah,
so that's not
Yeah, well, I like the app stuff. It's like a job better.
Mark Baker's good.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I didn't realize he looked this way. I haven't seen him in a long time.
Yeah,
I think he kind of hit that burnout point and I had to back away for a while.
when he went from like the nearly yeah. Easy on his
It'd be good to reconnect with him sometime. So, Mateo, Colin didn't make it.
Oh, it got bumped?
They told me they couldn't get me there until tonight or tomorrow morning. He's listening on the Hangout.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. Colin.
Oh,
Colin here.
he was good to see him.
Yeah. Unfortunately, we couldn't get him here because he was joining. Really wanted to join to be here.
Stop complaining and start participating.
Yeah, but it's still very
Yeah, Colin's flight got canceled. He can't get here until tonight or tomorrow.
Oh, shoot.
I guess that's why it's too late to fit in here, right?
Was he trying to slip in this morning, kind of thing?
They've had so many cancellations yesterday. Everyone has they got bumped today, so nothing's available.
Okay, so I guess the next thing we have on the list is to delve into the postmortem and the priorities and issues. I'll bring up the more detailed breakout that we had down below.
Hi, Colin.
Okay, so we don't have fit everything in here, but I think the goal here is to, we have a half an hour set for each of these different sections, sort of call out what's the most important things and challenges that we think we need to talk about, and provide some context for a later breakout session. So if we just start with what's there, I guess the one thing we saw that was called out by the Netflix presentation was the current state of some of the tools and what some of those key tools are. So I guess it's kind of like there's different ways we could come at it. We could kind of try and identify the key use cases and then look at the tools that fit that, or look at the tools. So I see some nodding to the use cases.
I think use cases are critical. I mean, I think if you talk to Netflix, you're going to get one set of use cases that require what you were saying, full visibility across native and JavaScript stacks. I mean, I think if you're talking to, I don't know, like the stack driver stuff, if you guys are looking at something similar, you've got a different end user and they're thinking about their world in terms of JavaScript, and you start throwing native stacks and flame graphs and LL Node at them, they're lost, right? And so I think one of the key things here, and this is that second bullet, is what's the right level of abstraction for looking at this problem, right? And is MDB and LL Node the right things? They're necessary for some users, right? They're necessary at some level of scale. Are they going to be accessible to the broadest audience of users, right? And I think that's sort of the key thing for people to tease out. I think looking at the use cases, understanding where you need things like full stack or full visibility across native and JavaScript stacks, where you don't, is an interesting exercise.
So can I make a counterpoint to Mike's point here? It is an interesting exercise. I think we should avoid anything that sort of goes into productizing or user experiencing too far, because ultimately what we can really do through this group is provide the data and then enable other layers of abstraction and maybe even simplification at higher tiers, but if we sort of cap the level of abstraction at simple for end user consumption, then we're not enabled. We really need to enable diagnostics in Node, and I think we're all here because we're not there yet.
No, and I totally agree with that. I mean, I would say like simple things are simple, complex things are possible, right?
I actually really agree with Mike. So what I saw was long-running workloads, and I work on it's a build tool, but really it's a work tool, and so the kind of work we have is thousands and thousands and thousands or millions of jobs. So these are things that are maybe not as important to other people, like startup time, and these are the things that are really critical to us. So like I just agree that there is different use cases, and they might not all be covered
by Netflix, right?
Yes, but also like 2 points. I think that one level of abstraction is maybe the wrong phrasing, because like you said, like there are use cases plural. So I think that identifying different scenarios might be more valuable than creating this one profile that's the most broadest and everyone will have this one. And also what I think what you implied was capping at a level of abstraction is not only a choice of having less work, but also having less work while collecting. So there might be just different scenarios that need to cap the level of abstraction.
So, key question here, does the current data output support multiple levels of abstraction? Right, does it capture enough information for us to be able to layer that those abstractions in? And do we need to worry about layers of abstraction, or just let the vendors deal with that and we capture the right information?
Yeah, so I think this is sort of going back. It's like if you're going to deal with, I need to understand the native frames and the native heap, then I'm going to get a core dump of memory, and I need to parse out the objects as they're represented by V8 or Chakra core. And there's not much you can do except you need the tooling from the vendors, and it's going to be a bit painful, and you got to fight for that. But if you go back to a Node developer who's programming in JavaScript, I care about the JavaScript objects, and there's an opportunity to say, can we extract just the information about the JavaScript objects in the user space in a more uniform way, so that as a tool provider, I can just parse a JSON format. I don't know if that's the right one, but I don't have to worry about whether it came from V8 or Node Chakra Core or which version of Node. I just know I get a standard format of the JavaScript objects, and I operate on Node. And there's also an opportunity to do that, I think, more efficiently, since you don't have to preserve everything and say, I can leverage the GC or something else to dump these very rapidly. So I think that's the interesting sort of point in the design space where there's an opportunity to do some of this.
Yeah, I was thinking you were actually going a different way, which is even, LL Node gives you a fairly low-level interaction. We talked about doing things like a JavaScript API on top, so that if you're the JavaScript developer, you can get at the JavaScript level information maybe more easily, right? In language you're familiar with. Enable more people to write tools. Kind of different.
Yeah, I think I totally agree with that. I think that's spot on. Right, either an API or something through the Chrome debug protocol to essentially light up and acceptable.
It's kind of like, I guess, there's a bunch of different dimensions we can get at it with. Like, there's sort of the use cases of having memory problems, performance problems, crash. And I guess postmortem is sort of, some of these will straddle across postmortem monitoring, and maybe that's right. But we're thinking postmortem. The other dimensions we have, like these tools like Node, Node reports. The other thing I think we should talk a bit about is the level of integration. And what base level expectation should somebody coming, I've installed my Node runtime. What should I expect is already there versus what should I expect to have to install additional components and so forth. So our question is how do we take these different things and come up to something which we're going to focus our breakout session on? I think we've got lots to talk about. But I'm still not sure how we get it sort of framed the starting point. How do we think we want to get?
Yeah, I mean, when I did this, I sort of I put in sort of the desired outcomes, and feel free to, disagree or add to these things. But
scroll up a bit here.
Yeah. Okay. I mean, my thinking was if you walk away with sort of more detail around the set of bullet points, that it's a win. So, and as what we were talking about before, understanding the, scenarios and priorities, how do you keep tools from being broken, identifying the seams, right, which is kind of what we were talking about, you just, where are we dumping data to, how does somebody consume that data, what are the switches to turn this stuff on or off, and how do you make sure things stay up to date? But feel free to, I don't know if there's other things that people specifically would want to walk away from.
I think one thing we definitely want to have a conversation on is promises and postmortem deployment with promises, because that's something that's been a fair amount of discussion.
Yeah.
Yeah, if you want to just take that in there.
Specifically, that is just knowing when you have unhandled rejections. What is
Yeah,
what's
it's all around the. Today if you have an unhandled exception, you can bring Node down and take the core up at the appropriate spots, but that helps you figure out where you should have handled your exceptions. With an unhandled rejection, you don't get that because you don't know when it's unhandled. Somebody can always add on.
So actually, implemented dev tools 3 years ago, when we launched promises, because that was one of the issues that was there. There's no equivalent to break on uncalled exception that we have in that. We implement that for promises, and the way we do it is that every time you reject or throw, and that can cause a promise to be rejected, we visit the entire tree of promises and look for user-defined rejection. If there is one promise that doesn't have one, then at the point of rejection, we actually signal left tools to break. It's configured to do that.
So these are existing APIs that Node could plug into.
Well, not really sure.
I mean,
it's
the
exposed.
challenge too was you might have an unhandled rejection, but later in some code you'll go and throw an event or a catch on it, which takes care of it, right?
Right, and that's where the discussion, like there was a fair amount of vocal opposition to just saying, well, if it's unhandled, then do the same things you did for the unhandled exception, because the message was that's going to make you incompatible with JavaScript that's running in the browser. And so we've been looking for an alternative that won't.
That is true. What I'm saying is that it's not really a tool in the sense of just hard abort, because that's also not what's being done in that. You have an unhandled rejection in the browser, just nothing happens. And in that tools you can configure, you can set a checkbox saying you want to break.
Right, but I guess I'd be interested if from Netflix's perspective, if I didn't think that would actually address the use case, right? So, I think it's something where you guys want to have it running because this thing that happens very infrequently, or not at all.
You want to break and have it call down.
Right.
Whenever you have an unhandled rejection.
But a really unhandled rejection, right?
So this is a heuristic, right? So this is
Yeah.
what Chrome does for debugging purposes is a heuristic. Like this is most likely what the user wanted to debug, right? So they most likely wanted to look at it.
Right.
So I think it works great for that use case, but I think the disconnect might be that it might not actually work that well for production, because it requires work at the time of unhandled rejection, which actually may not turn out to be it will get handled later. So I think there's still a disconnect.
I think though, isn't it the thing that some people may say like, I never expect to have an unhandled rejection. If this ever occurs, do something, or whatever it is. Other people are like, hey, that's cool, let it ride.
I think the challenge is that you're using other people's modules, so it's very hard to know.
That's true. Yeah. If your style guide says that you never want unhandled rejections, like you never want to attach a reject handle date, then that's fine. But if other people write modules that rely on that don't adhere to the style guide, then
I'm sorry, all the time, so I've seen more problems with unhandled rejections than the benefits that they could generate for Node. Not for JavaScript in general. In the browser, it's great not to listen to that thing, but in Node, if you have an unhandled rejection, you have very likely have a pending HTTP request being left over somewhere. So and this means you have a file descriptor allocated, you have memory allocated that it's not going to be cleaned up. So it maps very closely to a memory leak.
So you're saying an unhandled rejection is necessarily a bad thing.
You don't know which state or application ends up. So why do you want to handle?
But then you can never use a constructor, a promise constructor that throws or rejects, because you cannot have at that point a reject handler attached.
No, because they reject at the on the next at the end of the microtask queue. So you have an opportunity to every time you get a promise, you need to attach.
Right, but the promise constructor runs synchronously.
Yeah, but if it throws the unhandled rejection will always be.
Yeah, but at that point you don't have a reject handler yet.
No, you have.
No. How?
Because if new promise and then you do .catch, the unhandled rejection.
No, but
what I'm saying is the constructor is going to run first and it's going to reject before you've attached the handler.
Yeah, but that goes into the unhandled rejection only at the end of the microtask queue.
Yeah, but by that time it's already too late to find the context, because
no, that's sorry. These are completely what I'm saying is a different issue from the postmortem thing. So this is the issue with unhandled rejection is very well faced. There's a lot of different problems in there. So from a user perspective, not having not attaching an 100 rejection. So keep going your application when you have an 100 rejection. It can very likely lead to a memory leak. Okay. Now, using the same mechanism for post-mortem debugging is a completely different story. So I want to keep the two things separated, because it's not. One thing is the fact that currently in Node we are not crashing when that's happening. Okay, that's one potential issue, and then the second issue is using post-mortem debugging in there.
So, I think they're kind of tied, because one of the reasons you're trying to use the post-mortem debug and generate core is to find the place you're going to be introducing your memory leak and fix it.
Yeah, but yes, they're loosely tied. Let me.
Right, like.
So I guess the question here: what do we want to get out of the breakouts and post-mortem debugging related to promises and unhandled rejections? So, and I think maybe if we agree on sort of what we want to walk away from, we can dive into all the details.
Kind of like, what are our next steps on that?
Okay.
Like, I don't know, without a lot more discussion, we'll get to more.
Sure.
But it's like, we should have enough time to say, what's our concrete next step to make progress on it?
I'm just going to type on.
Yeah. I was just from our things, the other things, like trying to merge some of this in some of the discussion. The other thing I can see is like, what is the key tooling for postmortem? And, you know, we've got some of the things like LLNode, details about report. Are there others? And then, you know, so documenting the key tooling, and what level of integration we'd expect with Node or not. I think from here, the level of testing and how do we integrate it into the project that we're going to keep this key tooling working, alive, well supported.
So one thing I would be interested in is some data on whether this path prediction that we implement is useful.
Right, in the context of the promises, or
postmortem.
So which one, the
catch prediction?
Catch prediction, right? Okay, so
it is sort of already available through different protocols. It's a little bit not really all that straightforward to use, but I think whipping up an kind of like prototype should be very easy. It's not all that performant because it wouldn't like to be really performant because it only has to work with that. But it can be made multiple if it turns out to be very useful. But before we like try to optimize that, it would be good to have data.
So we could add in like we want to have enough discussion there to, you know, decide that it's interesting enough to do something more, and what that more will be. And then the other thing I had, like the key scenarios, we would like to come up with a document. Here are the key scenarios where we see people use postmortem, so that we can validate against the tools to see if the tools actually support those. So maybe it's like the key scenarios and the tooling matrix or something. That makes sense. Yes.
I think that should also be a general outcome of everything here, especially that we come up with problem scenarios and then document a general way to deal with them in like end user facing, that end users are able to observe.
I don't know if I got the right wording for that. Are there any other, I don't know, promises was one. Is there anything others, like sort of specific things people have in mind that we should put on that agenda in terms of like an outcome?
No, is everything you have on the board captured in the doc, or
it's kind of written in a different way.
See anything necessarily that is.
Yeah, I just grouped the key tooling. Like you had a few bullets like plan how to prevent tools. I really think you know, when we get into the discussion, it's like, okay, what is the key tool?
Yeah.
And then underneath that is basically like, well, integration, testing, your performance, talk about promises, scenarios, tooling matrix, and prediction. I think pretty much, like, I don't see anything here that's missing there either. I guess usability in here too.
It's a user problem.
Do you think we could go over the existing tools really quickly and like what might be coming down the pipe in terms of like features in those, and/or if there's like severe maintainability problems? I know at least someone here is probably active in maintaining Node and also possibly Node report.
So maybe current status for the tools that are going through those tools. Yeah, that's a good idea. That fits in well with Joy, who's going to give an update on Node. We can talk to Node reports. And heat dumps is one where, well, anyway, yeah, we'll talk about that as well. Are there any other tooling? So, you know, the list of tooling I had here was Node, heat dumps, Node report. Are there any other key post-mortem things we should have on that list? Just as a reminder? Well, I think that's part of the discussion is, you know, there are some tools to generate heat dumps, but there's limitations in terms of like how to generate them, how often. I think you can, but it's maybe not as effective.
Plus, mine is hard because it might out there they dump because they need pressure. Already, that's fine. Yeah.
Well, you can, there's things, so certainly I think with node reporting, you can configure to generate a heat dump on like out of uncaught exception. And we've had discussions about using Node. We actually have code to generate a heat dump out of a core dump, right? So there are things we can still do there if that's one of our key, you know, we see that as heat dumps one of our key tooling. Then it's like, well, how do we get the artifacts in the or if there's some alternative to get, you know, there's some alternative to get the same data or to solve the same problem. That's sort of what I'm getting at. Like, these are the tools that we're thinking about and discussing, but if there's any other tools that people do that can help you. I say, this is driven from, you know, other languages have equivalents to those. I'm trying to think if there's any other, you know, tools we can see in other languages.
Different types of things captured. Okay.
I don't know what's the status, but Matthias, we're working on a call down, heat dump converting tool. Maybe you already have a working demo.
Yeah, I have been working on a converter from core dumps to heap dump, heap snapshot. It's very early stage, but it generates a format that is loadable by Chrome DevTools. It doesn't have the list of retainers yet. I'm working on that right now, but it's very early stage, and it's harder than anticipated. I thought it was going to be easier. I'm doing this using Node to take advantage of the visitor already implemented on Node and make sure it works on multiple versions of Node.
Okay, so I think that's definitely like on the update. We should include that on the heat front.
Other data that we can provide, for example, modules, probably you can get this other system somehow, but completed
This process.versions has some of that. You're running.
I think not the third-party modules. So okay, all the modules that technical that have features. I think to reproduce what's
hopefully 6 years before. Okay, because that's the kind of thing which, you know, if we thought about it, we could put it into a memory structure that LLM could find. And yeah, on the heap dump, okay, so yeah, let's have an update on the heap dump, because I think, you know, one of our outcomes could be that we should, you know, make sure that the work you're already doing is publicized, and if anybody else wants to get involved. Definitely been something that's been, the post-mortem working group was meeting regularly, was one of the main discussion topics. Definitely good to hear you working on.
So I think, not fully confident, that most of this stuff is captured in the doc, right? If, you know, and as we do the breakouts, if somebody wants to, you know, maybe somebody captures a photo of what's on the board, and yeah, and you know, if you're there, like, keep us honest about making sure we cover all of this stuff. We try to sort of frame things to talk about in this discussion list. So, but I mean, point of order, it's 11:02, so.
We did start about 10 minutes late.
Oh, did we?
Okay. I watched, so I don't want to cut off. If we're done, but that's good. But I think otherwise we can probably spend about another 5 minutes.
One question about heap dumps. How important would be record tracing?
What?
Record tracing. So one thing that we implemented in Chrome recently is connecting a heap dump walks through the embedded part. So if you have a wrapper object in C++ that holds onto like global handles, then we can trace through that and have that in the heap dump graph. I wonder how important that is for Node.js.
You're basically saying once you get a wrapper in C, it hides the app.
Right, because then it just becomes a global handle. And then a global handle would be considered as a root, and then you don't have the path anymore.
So I don't know if like Netflix or, you know, speak to that. Is that something that you've been running into? Okay. And I think to answer something like that, if nothing else, we can come out with, this is some questions we want to answer, and then we can go out and open issues. We could do something like the benchmarking survey, where we could actually go to a much larger group of people and ask, you know, specific questions. So maybe that's something we should also think about as we're going through here. Are there a list of questions that we don't know the answers to, but we want to go out to a broader slice of the Node.js community? Because we can easily put together another survey which will ask those very specific types of questions. And I think that would be quite useful as well. So maybe actually, maybe we can make an outcome of each of these is like a survey question. And you know, at the end of the discussion, we can see what we have. If we have no questions, fine. But if we have a bunch of questions, we each break out together resources. Other topics, framing that we get into. Okay, I will take a picture here. Okay, so now let's just flip back to the other one and see what we've got on YouTube.
Debugging.
Okay.
Monitors.
We switched around some of them, right? So the monitoring is later on. So debugging is next. Now, I don't want to necessarily discussion on all. So if there's any other volunteers or something that want to do the debugging one, you're welcome. Otherwise, you know, I will get up and do it. No takers? We think you do a great job.
You're doing such a great job.
I have no problem doing it. I just want to make sure if somebody else wants to, they're Especially in some of them, I know some people will be more in the loop than I am. Okay, so I guess for debugging, did we have a breakout list? Oh.
Yeah.
We don't have a breakout list? Okay.
We have, I never have to debug LO, written by Anonymous Tiger.
What is LO?
I have no idea. And it just
LOL?
disappeared.
Meant to be?
I don't know.
Definitely LO.
It's gone now. So Anonymous Tiger decided to be here.
I mean, over the last year, we had the update to the debugging protocol.
Oh yeah, the legacy API is removed since 30 minutes ago.
Now, it wasn't being used at all in the latest versions anyway, right? So, and Jan did a lot of work on the replacement command line inspector. So I don't think we have any like burning issues already identified, but I thought it's still an important part of the overall diagnostic story. So really, it's to us to say, is there anything we need to be discussing on that front? And we could say, no, we think we're okay state.
So one statement, I think bugging, we have good debug tools, but what I would say is program understandability for Node is not that great. And the reason is stack traces don't provide any value. Stack traces don't provide any value, this stuff goes into async hooks. I think we should discuss that, right? So how do we make sure people can understand their programs when they're stopped in a debugger? I know what this is doing, and today it doesn't make sense.
So I think also externally. So there was, you guys were talking about chakra. And so, I mean, and I was working on debug wire protocols a long time ago. But if we could have a standardized representation of a frame, that would be great. Like for, like as you say, when you get when a user prints out the stock trace, they're given a bunch of stuff that they have to parse like semantically with their eyes. You know, what does this mean? But I think if there was some sort of reliable format there, then that might be enough to jumpstart an ecosystem.
I agree with that. I think Lee's point was more around understanding asynchronous call flow, right?
But the data is not even there.
Yeah, I mean, I wouldn't make a strong statement that stacks, like synchronous stacks, are useless. But I think relating a single synchronous stack to asynchronous call paths is a challenge. And we can discuss that more, I think, when we get into the monitoring stuff. And yeah, we can. So the other comment, I think, related to debugging tools and related to postmortem debugging is it would be nice if the same tools would work on a core dump as they work on a live process, right? And you can enable that somehow, and you can't do everything, right? But some things you should be able to do, look at a stack, right? Inspect variables that are happening at the time of the core dump. I think that would be a useful thing, and I think that is something that's an accessible path to a wide number of users, right?
I think LL Node is along, it's using the same debugger underneath. So
it is, but
it's
I mean,
interesting to think
how many JavaScript developers are using LL Node?
Yeah, it would be really interesting to have.
So there is a JavaScript API in development. So right now the API only works with core dump, but it can be worked on so that it could attach to a running process. So with that API, developers can like iterate on that to build better like graphic GUI tools using API.
So can you add to the postmortem debugging one that we make sure like another outcome is to talk about higher level tools?
I thought it was on there. I'll make sure it's there.
Just because that's a key point of, yeah, can we, those three tools are there, but can we make them more consumable? And that's what I was getting at. Like, I think because the underlying debugger, LMO uses the same debugger which can open live core, or whatever we build on top should be able to work.
It would also be interesting to have a node expose protocol so that you can basically just open from that to look at the current state of the process.
That's ideally what you'd want, some Chrome DevTools adapter sitting over top of.
Oh, you mean like for you to fire up a DevTools protocol server?
Yeah.
So yeah, that could be possible. Yeah.
I mean, it would take some wrangling of stuff, but
At least you will have to implement a WebSocket server there.
Yeah.
But it's doable.
And the goal being that when you connect with your debugger, it gives you a view of what was going on when the crash happened.
yes,
As
but
if
you
you connect
actually
to the debugger.
pause the process.
Right.
You can just click on the sources tab and you see where it crashed.
Yeah, that's quite, because then that makes it accessible to all the existing debugger types.
So this fundamentally is what we do with the time travel debugger snapshots. We inflate the objects back into a live instance, and then you just connect with whatever debugger you wanted, since we can start up the debugger protocol there on that instance, and it looks, even though it's dead in a sense, it looks exactly like if you'd attached live, regardless, and you can use any debugger tool that could attach to the live process before.
I'd like to hear more about that. I've never heard of that before. That's something we talked about ages ago, but that sounds fascinating.
Sure. I mean, I can talk more about that at some point in time. Yeah.
I guess in the context of what we're doing today, is there, because you're working on that very specific kind of debugger, is there something in Node that's missing, or are there problems that as a community we need to work on something to help support those kinds of efforts?
Yeah, fortunately, we, I guess the big challenge for us in that area is you don't have to make major changes to Node, but there are some places where having either some better hooks or a slightly higher level understanding would allow us to do this faster and with less pain. It's more just engineering. There aren't any deep fundamental issues. I think the larger story is, we've been building this out, and then, now that we're actually in a fairly stable place with it, we've got ES6 support. Mike was heroic in that. So it's a fairly real thing, and it's like, how do we make this generally available to the Node community and to light up a lot of stuff? I mean, I don't want to bang my own drum too much, but it's a little painful because unhandled rejection promises super easy. If you have a trace, you just wait until you actually get the unhandled rejection, and then you can wind back to any point in time and see like, oh, this is when that thing was actually rejected. So it's no problem, right?
Right.
Pulling out memory dumps. It's, we already have the memory dump. So it's like there's a core technology there that once you actually have it broadly available and wide it really solves a lot of these things very, very easily. So it's more a question of how does this fit into the community? How do we start surfacing up through Node in a standard way and move forward with that than any core technology?
Yeah, and I mean, some of the challenges I think there, one is that, this is a Chakra feature only. It doesn't have support for this. And the other challenge there is there's code patterns inside of Node where memory is updated outside of, the JavaScript APIs. So then you lose the observability of those writes, which means you can't track what's going on. And so one of the big challenges we face with Node Chakra Core is that we've got all these mods to the Node source, and you end up with these terrible,
I wouldn't say all. It's not like
there's
we have
some,
tens
sorry.
of thousands. We have some. And yes, having some consideration of that, and also some higher level things, it would be nice to know what, there are a bunch of events in the time travel log, but they all correspond to processing one HTTP request. So if we could add a little bit of higher level intelligence there, we can start doing more interesting things and saying, oh yes, here's not just a trace of linear events that you got to figure out what they mean, but here's an HTTP request, and we can trace you through in time travel debugging of the handling of that request, both in terms of, the way it's processed in Node, and then async context would be.
So I know Matteo wants.
Oh, I just wanted to reinforce an under-rejection problem.
Right.
That's why I mentioned it. I knew
But I
I'd
was
get
thinking,
you on our
like, if
side.
there's any way we could use a light version of that to keep like enough, enough data to go back or whatever. So it's worth interested. We're all interested if there's something that will help on that.
It's like I ported some recent code from callback to async await, and finding out where those unhandled rejections were happening has been a massive pain. And that's at least that was me. Like it was because of the interaction between not just but as much from it might be that the solution is already there, but it's probably not well communicated. So it's not. So there might be just for some of those issues, in fact, writing some good approaches on how to solve some of those type of issues. Documenting them might be enough. Okay, like I just want to note this, or maybe there are some little changes to code that will enable such an approach. So it's not. It might be that there is some very simple solution to some of those. Just want to.
The other thing that comes to mind is, do you have those as examples? It's like if you had, here's a code base, here's where there was not handled rejection. Having some of those examples would be good.
Yeah, that would be quite good. I don't have any, like, I think it was scrap code.
Right, okay.
That was sitting in the middle of a migrate or whatever. Like it's very hard to, either it's private code or it's scrap code that got merged and landed. It never meant to arrived into a commit.
You could create just toy examples.
Yeah, you can know, but there is a major difference between toy examples and.
Well, I mean, so see, I'm just trying to understand, like, the unhandled rejection, when it happens, is the problem that it's gone from the stack because it unwinds and it's just gone?
I think we're sort of diverging from.
Yeah.
We should take that back, but it is
interesting in a breakout in that, totally.
We
Yeah.
actually have like some, tools sort of working on it has like, here's just some artificial ones, right? But some real life ones, I think is where I was getting at.
I think related to the debugging thing, what I heard is you want the ability to kind of, trap in a debugger when there is an unhandled rejection.
Yeah, and know where that.
Talking about is available from DevTools. I don't know how that works in Node. Well, but I don't know if that specific break on unhandled exception stuff is available through Node. My understanding is it's not.
No, it is.
It is?
Well,
we have to inspect them on.
I think the problem with the definition of what is an unhandled rejection.
Hey!
From the airport.
You made it.
Finally.
Survived.
We moved monitoring later in the agenda. Missed that part.
Thanks. I don't know if you need a chair.
There is this chair here. Come join me. You can squeeze.
So I guess on the debugging thing, what we should probably get to is like, we need a breakout on debugging. Do we have enough issues that people who want to do a breakout on that? I've heard a few things that we could investigate, like, there's the side of like looking at better hooks, better high level information, but I don't know if we're ready. You guys have something to talk about specifics on that front? Big breakout or?
I think maybe we can just grab a sidebar with a few people who are interested in talking about maybe like the alias buffer stuff we added and some other things that might be useful. But I think it's a little more technical and detailed on that. The only thing in a breakout might be if there's general interest in the larger time travel as what is it, how does it work, what does it mean? I'm happy to have a conversation about that.
What do people think? Like we could actually. Look, our agenda is flexible. We could say, like, if you think that's a 10-15 minute presentation or whatever it is, and we all think that's something we should have in, we can put it in.
I mean, feel free to disagree. My suggestion would be like maybe we wait till tomorrow and we see how things are shaking out. I kind of feel like between the postmortem stuff and the monitoring topics, we're going to have a lot of content, and it seems like they're potentially more interested in those things.
I'm sort of like, that's where I'm thinking, like, there's probably some interesting things to talk about here, but the other ones, I think we have more problems to figure out, right? Whereas this is like maybe not in a terrible state where I haven't heard anything.
I think it's more informational than action.
Yeah, I think the only thing that was interesting there, really interesting there was, I mean, obviously trying to travel debugging, but the idea that sectors don't really give you enough information. So we could maybe at some point talk about, like, if you run like a breakpoint, how to inspect like what might be waiting in the event loop.
See, but the waiting in the event loop doesn't answer the question of what executed the event.
Yeah.
And so I do think that in the monitoring stuff, we can talk more about async context and some formalization work around trying to better define what asynchronous context is. I think that if that holds, that should help with this level of understanding.
I agree.
Not that the event loop isn't an interesting thing.
Okay, so kind of what I'm hearing is that we'll see how it's going. If we have time at the end of tomorrow, we may bring back a session on debugging. We can have a on time travel. We can start to talk about the stack trace issues, but we'll kind of put that as a, if we don't run out of time on the other thing. Everybody's thinking? Okay, that sounds good. So the next thing on our agenda is platform neutrality API. Let me George, did you want to take this one, or do you want me to frame it?
No, you go ahead.
Okay. So the concept we want to just bring up to have people start thinking about is, you know, we've been working on the NAPI as providing an API for add-on modules. As kind of our first place, you know, we have a standard set of API functions that they're called. We think that concept, it may be useful to extend that concept to a number of the other things we're thinking about. In terms of, you know, we want to have, say, for example, tracing. And if we're going to have tracing generating data from within Node, should we be extending what we call the NAPI to have a tracing section where, okay, here are the APIs you can generate trace points from C code, from JavaScript code. Similarly, you could have APIs at the back end that say, here's an API you can use to consume that data. You know, obviously, we would have a default that maybe bridges it to the V8 consumer, but we could then, you know, have APIs so that other people could plug in their own if you're running in a cloud, running in Chakra Core. If you look at things like debugging, any of the areas that we're really talking about today, a lot of them, you know, there'll be a certain level of support we want to provide in the runtime. And then, you know, we see the larger ecosystem building on top of that. And should we be looking to say, okay, we should standardize that through, you know, what we call the NAPI as the Node API, and look for in all these different areas where we can provide additional APIs, standardize those APIs, and make it easy to, you know, integrate your own back end, or, you know, have a standard for how you generate the data.
One pain point we have in core right now is if you look, there's multiple probe APIs. So we have like the dtrace macros, we have the trace event macros, I think there's LTTNG macros, there's the performance API stuff that's recent. All of these need to be instrumented individually within core. They all have to be maintained. We're not actually testing to make sure they still work. Except for like trace events and to a limited extent. It would be very nice to be able to instrument once to one API. We can instrument consistently throughout core, and then just have multiple providers on the back end, whether it's a dtrace provider or a trace event provider. Well, I don't care. It can plug into this stream wherever these probes are there. Having the API would allow us to go through and very consistently put probe points throughout core without having to worry about this. For example, the dtrace stuff only works with HP and TCP, I think, right now. The only parts that are instrumented. doesn't work with HB2, because I haven't done an instrument, all that stuff yet. Very inconsistent, and we need the consistency. So it's not just for end users; it's for core itself.
I guess the question becomes: all of these mechanisms, is somebody maintaining them? Whether we should standardize onto a single one or figure out what to do.
It's let's have a single one that we standardize within core, and if there are whatever the providers on the back end, right, those will be maintained independently. So
we probably need one.
Right. At least one provider.
At least one, and if we have enough providers to have multiple ports, that's great.
Right. Right. We could have a standard, as a separate project within the foundation, a dtrace provider for this, right? They plug in on the back end, but that would not be necessarily in core itself. It'd be a separate.
Yeah, and that's interesting from the Node Chakra core perspective, because Chakra is originally written for Windows. It uses ETW throughout. Like ideally, you want to be able to get a unified trace that includes Node stuff as well as Chakra events.
Does support MTDMT now?
It does. I don't know exactly all the details on how it's done.
So my understanding in how, for example, our LTTNG work, it is basically like, or all of these technologies are implemented right now are a bunch of like if devs and macros in our source code. Like I'm the overhead of pulling those off. So if you want to do a dtrace provider for Node that plugs into some generic system, the overhead of that might be a little bit too high.
Yeah, we need
compared to what is currently implemented right now. Like it's a significant concern.
Right. So there may need to be some still some of that macro-driven configure-based build time enablement of the provider, but at least being able to instrument in a consistent way, and then being able to specify which provider is there, either at configure time or runtime.
Yeah, but providing.
So you're saying the extra abstraction layer going to some arbitrary provider, once compiled in, maybe too much overhead.
Yes,
or ideally, what is a very
and also like if you in order to enable dtrace or LTTNG, you need to build do your own build of Node. That might not. That will not go into the direction of simplifying things.
That's not something users can easily do.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, I think in this front, it'd be interesting to understand what scenarios require, pluggable providers, and is it just a question that there's different providers in use across current node source, and maybe the answer there is to clean it up.
Yeah, so what's the benefit of having multiple?
Well, I think one benefit from Node Chakra Core is that we've got a bunch of stuff, that uses ETW. So maybe we would like Node itself to use ETW traces. But we could potentially fix that inside Chakra.
Yeah,
right? And we did do some work to enable help.
What I'm saying is that maybe having a convention is better than.
Right, and I'm at all for that. Up to this point, we've had different users wanting to use different tools, and platform support for those tools vary broadly. So the ability for Node to just say, here's some data, you figure out how to consume it. This kind of fits that case better. If we can pick a convention that works consistently that we can support on all of our platforms that users will want to use, then that's fantastic.
I thought the intention had been for trace events to be that thing, but I think it probably requires some.
Diving a bit deep. I think what we've identified is this is something that should come out.
Sure.
Yeah. So it sounds like there's some interest that we agreed we should have a breakout session delve into more details of what we should be doing on this front. Figure out in terms of outcomes, maybe we can spend just a couple of minutes of the outcomes. All I have in my head right now is like, well, what are the next steps on this front? Does anybody have anything more concrete?
Yeah, we should understand the use cases as well, just like other breakout sessions. and basically identify some next steps.
Okay. Any other comments before we move on to the next thing on our agenda?
I guess we should probably ask, does this in any way extend to like the idea that like beyond just like the VM you're running and stuff like, okay, our basic prop is only available on Linux? I mean, that might fit in somewhere else, but
Yeah, I think yes. In the general sense that like for any of the facilities, it's have like a standard API or a standard format that works everywhere. That is.
I want to get rid of anything that is either very platform specific or VM specific as kind of a, like, that's what we write to. Right? I want to have something that is agnostic that.
I think a very good output of if there is a breakout room on this, if it might be having a compatibility table to some extent of what is out there right now and on which platform it's available, and then go into, you know, what are we missing and so on, because it's some of us, every one of us uses only some of those. Like it's not like there's none of us that has experience on all the different tools. Like it's I don't know. This is something that is currently like the nice compatibility table of operating system to some extent, but for the various.
Looking at like which different trace tools are supported on which OSs.
Yes, and what is missing? What are missing? What are the use cases and which tools are there, or which primitives are there? And because currently it's the Wild West.
Another good outcome, I think, with at least discussion point we should have is what level of actual probe instrumentation is required versus what can be derived from kind of some of these other approaches, right? Like if we can understand the async context and actually trace that back through, we might not need as many explicit probe points in the code. Right. So I think it goes kind of back to the use case.
Does this level of insight and probing have any relevance to dev tools? Or what's the IE Edge tool?
F12 tools? Yeah, I mean, they don't work with Node today. I mean, currently we use the what is it called? The Chrome debug protocol inside of VS Code.
It's separate from the protocol. That's the only way that DevTools talks to Node.js. So also doesn't feed.
But you can import them, right? So trace events are importable. So it's not integrated into DevTools. I think there's another about tracing. And about tracing, that's
okay.
Yeah, it's just a tracing file.
Good.
But yeah, the standardized format and tracing file would enable a tools ecosystem to develop around it. So it's probably like a good goal. I don't exactly know what kind of detail would be necessary there. I think again it goes back to like, well, what are the use cases, and then maybe looking at use cases, some of this stuff will pop out.
Yeah, I mean, this is the only other area that I could think that we want to extend it is with this sort of the generalized tooling that we have, keeping that in mind that yes, we're going to be using these low-level tools, but there are also these platform level tools that are that we're aligning with, and making sure we retain compatibility.
Again, reminded me. Another discussion point will be so a lot of the APM vendors are using monkey patch to kind of hook in where they are. So whatever this API discussion is, we should also discuss standardized hook points so we can get out of monkey patch.
Yeah, there's an open issue on that in the diagnostics thing, and there's like a bullet list that magically solves the problem. So at some point we should probably need to talk about how do you get the right set of people to, grab some of those bullets and make them a reality?
I think bullet points are fun.
Sort of, yeah, we can try and like one of the most important things like that. Sort of
That'd be great.
Evangelize.
Yeah, my feeling is that it's going to have to be some sort of around that. Specifically, it's going to have to be some cooperative effort amongst the different APM vendors that are interested in, like, hey, I don't want to monkey patch everything anymore. Like, how do we cooperate and sort of get a library in place that lets us, not have to do that? Yeah, I mean, at some point we should probably talk about it. See if we can move it forward.
Does it fit under the monitoring section?
It could go under the monitoring. It's not really a platform independent thing, so I'd argue it probably needs to be under monitoring thing. There's potentially some overlap with the tracing provider, and I think what you said is like you need to be able to write data to some sink. What is that sink? Is it trace events?
This is also a more general concept of like we put some focus on trying to extend an API to these different areas. So I can see it being driven from monitoring, but they end up with additional API in the API.
That's possible.
Coming up.
It is primarily, I think, monitoring.
Others, before we move on to the next. Sure. Okay.
I'm not sure when do I need to do that. Yeah. I don't think that's
So again, I'll ask if anybody has a passion for testing and documentation.
how to engine.
You're doing great. Okay.
I'll keep going, but anybody stand up whenever you want. I guess
One question, I know it's diagnostic that you don't protest the different integration of the diagnostics. That's a nice question. I don't really think that we need to discuss it separately.
I think I'll need to find a way of funding documentation.
Breakout sessions about later today or
Right.
I want to make sure I was there.
Here is, like, do we need to do something specific around this initiative to make sure that happens? Like, I agree, it's part of all the other ones, but I don't think we're necessarily where we want to be. So, do we need to, as a group, say, here's a standard, a level of, if we're working on a new feature, well, we expect this level of testing, this level of doc before you go out of experimental. What can we do as a group to kind of encourage and make sure that this stuff happens? And if there's things that are causing it not to happen, what are those things? Can we surface them to somehow say, well, it's because we don't know how to generate jobs in our CI, right? And so we need to make that easier. Or these things are just so hard to test, we don't know how to test them. Like, that would be sort of the sort of thinking and discussion is kids.
What sort of documentation do we have today about the probes that exist in Node? Are you reading the code? That's where I would go. Okay. Got it.
You have to know which macros to look for.
Got it. So yeah, that would be nice to have a state of the world as it stands.
Yeah, but to get there, you have to have a consistent definition of where you have those probes. If you don't have that, what's the document?
Okay.
Or you look for capitalized, you grab for capitalized D trace and you're done. That's what you do now.
Just grab.
You just grab it. What?
Yeah.
Trace events.
And TTNG.
right? And performance API and
You grab for a lot of things, yes.
A lot of words.
No, it would be nice if somebody could look at their code and get a sense of what events would be emitted, right? Like that is from looking at user code, there's some way to kind of get a mental idea of what.
we should be able to look at the API documentation for a module and have it tell us what
events get
emitted, yeah, for diagnostic purposes.
So also, I mean, we've mentioned before use cases and then doc for those use cases.
Yeah, and I mean, I think like the one use case is like understanding which trace events get emitted. I know that there's a guy, and I am not going to be able to say his name, but he was on the working group calls, and he was trying to get some level of docs around how do you produce a flame graph and some things like that. So there's these certain, like diagnostic related tasks that aren't always obvious on how to set up or configure. He was trying to make an effort on those docs. And on a related issue, like, there was a discussion around, he's not a native English speaker. He's like, I can get you some technical content, but, somebody come in and make it pretty, right? Can somebody come in with an eye to, this is how good documentation should look, this is consistent, this is, somebody who's a docs person, can they come in and help scrub this and edit it, right?
Was that the request for the technical writer?
Yeah, I mean, and then it's sort of like, I think that somebody then said like, hey, can we get a technical writer? And someone was like, well, the Node Foundation has money, we should hire one. And then it was like, well, how do you do that? And then so I think I opened an issue in the community committee thing saying like, hey, this came up, right? Take it here. So I think that's sort of the other thing is like, the other use case is how do you get, or what are some, complex diagnostic tasks that people need to do?
Right, like I could see an outcome being, here's a matrix of, our use cases and what doc we would want to each of them, right? So the use case, doc, wanted, and then, from that, we could then say, well, what do we have? And the gaps, and if nothing else, we could then highlight as a, please help, this is an area people can help, right? Using you actually carry out one of these use cases, please write something that says what you're doing and start to work to fill that in. So that's something where, we could spend some time and work on that in terms of like, maybe that would be a good session at the end. Say, okay, we've discussed all these different things from that discussion that we come up with the start of this matrix in terms of their use cases in each of the different areas and what docs we do or don't have or would like to have.
So these use case driven sort of end-to-end documentations, I think are back to James' point. I think the other thing we should try to is like, how do we make sure that our APIs are documented well enough that they really talk about the debuggability and the traceability of those.
Nice.
Yeah, and I would also say that would include understanding where asynchronous communications happen.
Right. Yep. So I think I'd hazard to say some of our formal APIs, like an API actually has quite a bit of doc, but it may be back to the problem that we haven't actually standardized. Like we don't have an API, we've just done something, and correspondingly there's no doc to go along with that. So I don't know if it's tied together. If we standardize on something, then yeah, we need the doc to go with it.
Yeah, for example, in the FS module, some of our, if you look at the documentation for each individual function, some of them will say this is an asynchronous, fsync adds it. Like that's literally all it says. The other one, and then you look at the sync version of that, and it says this is the sync version of asynchronous. It literally gives you no context whatsoever for debugging that operation and what's happening under the covers. Right? What trace events are emitted in that process? How do you? What is the basic context in that flow?
Yeah, FS assumes a lot of POSIX
So is that
knowledge.
diagnostic specific, or is that more of a general project? We say, how can we get people pointing out the ones that you can help so that we can jump in and actually add?
I think it's both. So it's a general documentation issue that we have, but at the same time, like the diagnostics working group can provide the context for what information is necessary there.
Right, like what's missing. So so I could see we could come out of an outcome that says, actually, we'd like to have these APIs, whether we have them or not, and then we want the corresponding docs. Kind of related to some of the other discussion, but I can see, yeah, these are the APIs we should have, and you should know how to have an API and know how to do it. And separately, it's like API doc improvement, right? Or doc, or existing doc. It's like, how do we identify, because I think if we said these 30 calls could use a better description, some people might volunteer to help fix.
And we've actually had, I mean, as silly as it seems, we actually have had some people push back on the idea that the doc should be more detailed on this. To the point where people were requesting, and then people in core were like, no, that's just ridiculous, just go learn the
What was
POSIX
their
function.
argument for that?
That people should just know what the POSIX functions do. Basically.
We've gone beyond, like,
We've gone beyond that,
we
yeah.
started as, very Unix philosophy, and like we've gone beyond
have
that.
to move beyond that. So it's like being able to make a statement as a diagnostics working group and saying, no, this is the standard of documentation that's required for this for these things, then I think that's go a long way.
I typically, whenever I do a training course on Node, I typically have to explain those.
Yeah, sure.
Have to explain what. The POSIX stuff.
Right. So if you know Linux in and out, you're good, but otherwise.
But most of our typical
JavaScript developers
do not know them.
Sure.
Let's be very outspoken because that's.
How many people are going to know what fsync does?
Yeah.
Right. I mean.
So I think that's a good one where one of our outcomes could be something that comes out of this group that says there's places in the documents like this we've assumed on this kind of knowledge. We don't think that's appropriate. Us as a group think we should be doing this, and then we can have the discussion with the larger team to get consensus, or we can this other one.
Yeah. It would be very nice if in our documents there are some folded sections that are by default are folded, so they don't pollute the flow. But they actually, you can expand them, and they say for each of the functions, for each of the things, these are the nice 3, 4, whatever, 5 things you can do to get some insights on what's happening here. What's happening.
Yeah, the other interesting thing there is identifying the personas of the reader, right?
Yeah.
And, it's like one persona is like the JavaScript developer, and I know some JavaScript, and I don't know much more than that, right? What are they going to want to see? And then you've got someone else, right?
A vendor or tooling provider, maybe looking at a deeper perspective.
Like somebody at Netflix, right? It's like, and we used to, at Microsoft, we used to assign names to these people, and it was like, we called Einstein was a C++ developer, and what was the other one? I can't remember. Mort was the Visual Basic developer, and then there was something in the middle. But what happened, and they don't do it anymore, but what happened was, people could have a conversation about who the target was for some feature or something like that. Right? So, I don't know that you necessarily have to go through and assign names, but it is a nice shorthand for, to differentiate the JavaScript user from the APM vendor from the, the Netflix scale.
And I think as we have this discussion on the presentation and personas, it's almost like we need to figure out how to get that is their skill for any documents. And get some volunteers on that front. Like I know I'm more interested on the technical side. I'm willing to content, but figuring out how to make the foldable things and all that. So I don't know if we have, if we have people who are passionate about that, that'd be great. Otherwise, we may need to go out and make that as a community. If we're saying like this is one of our focus areas, how do we get some folks and then go out and make all the hopefully get some other help.
I don't necessarily think this group is the right group to do those changes, but at least to establish the baseline for what is expected in the documentation and kind of do those high-level bullet points so we can then go out and ask people, hey, are you willing to?
Yeah, like certainly doing, yes, some very concrete pieces of this. But it's sort of like, I think, as a group, we can perhaps get the bigger picture in place and then go out to try and get the help to make it happen.
If we can identify some of these gaps or opportunities for collaborators to go, do, then we can take it to the community committee and find someone who is interested, passionate, we may need to pair with them a little bit at the beginning, just because not just having the context.
Yeah, I think we'll still need volunteers from like on the diagnostic parts. We're going to have
We're going to have to be there.
But
For diagnostics, we have our own docs, but there's other groups as well that would have their own information in docs. And I think there's actually, at the moment, somewhat of an architectural problem in the docs itself, of just like the concept of a module is just a single page. And that, I feel that actually discourages us having detailed docs. It's like FS is this gigantic file, like scroll for 30 seconds to get to the bottom, but it has nothing.
It's horrible. Yeah, it's
like,
horrible to maintain the document.
If that was like a separate page for each function, you would instead have, oh, this page looks incredibly empty. We need more content.
It doesn't have to be a page. I mean, if we can have just a data format where we can document these things and then run it through some generator and run it all, that's fantastic. But there are other ways I'd like to be able to get to the help documentation other than going to the website.
I think, yeah, as a group, like if we could identify some of those key things, like this is holding us back in terms of getting proper diagnostics documentation. That's the kind of things we can start by surfacing. And it's a project that's, I doubt we're going to take that whole problem on as this group, but whatever concrete things we can bring up to try and help push it forward.
Yeah, and I think a good outcome here would be like, I think being able to hand some list of sort of requirements or criteria to somebody that's somebody who gets documentation, right? And we can say like, hey, we want a workflow that looks like this. We want expandable and collapsible sections for more detail to target different users. We want, better structure around modules. We want, how-tos on how to do complex tasks, things like that. And then, if we can hand that to somebody, they can come back and say like, great, here's a layout, here's, some tooling around that process. That would be fantastic. But,
like I could see if we could come up with these three concrete things. These are the issues in our doc approach that cause us to have problems documenting. Here's a matrix of the documents we would like for diagnostics, along with, here's a link to what we already have or not, because then you can see, there's like 10 missing boxes. That's the concrete things somebody can go inside the box. These are a list of concrete things to address. And then these would be existing doc gaps, like, this FS one, like the one that James mentioned, just doesn't have any detail, right? So this, again, if we had an existing list, and possibly an easy way for people to add to that list, then I can see concrete things that you can basically point anybody at, got an interest, and say, well, look, I'm building this matrix, you can help by addressing one of these issues, or by addressing one of these very specific problems in the doc itself.
I want to add that the docs does not have to be like markdown documents or HTML files. They could be like help command in Python, where you don't actually have to look at a text file. You can just type help something on the command line, and you can get useful information from that. That does not have to be in core. That could be a userland module. And that will solve the issues like the FS docs, or maybe some more general topic like diagnostics. Although I'm not quite sure how the keywords would work.
If we had the documentation in a way that was not just in a giant markdown file, if we could separate it out. There's a couple of options we have. There's one guy that was looking at producing man pages for every function that he was running into a lot of issues on how to generate those from our current source. I've been looking at a tool, a command line tool to do something very similar to what you're talking about, just be able to type, node explain and then type what it is and then get details on it. But we need that documentation in a much more consumable way for us to be able to do that.
Yeah, you probably want a combination. Like I find the API website's great.
Yeah.
But I could also see those being another good way. So you almost wanted in a, probably as you were saying, consumable so that you could generate multiple different ways of getting it.
Yeah. And to get to what Mike's been talking about having experimentation, different views of these things, we really need to the pattern for success is to kind of go outside of the source tree and then bringing back what works rather than trying to evolve internally to the perfect definition of the thing.
Yeah, we don't need to invent new things.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully somebody else has done what we need.
So the current documentation, is there a group that maintains that or
we had a documentation working group that failed spectacularly.
That's the reason for the data.
And nobody's picked it up since. There has been some efforts just kind of to incrementally improve the docs that are there. Like Anna went through and did some metadata per function where you can tell when it was added, deprecated, and change log and that kind of thing. But that's about the most it's evolved since. Are you aware of any other?
In terms of the web facing, the talks to like work on future website stuff probably will touch that in some capacity, because if we get design for the website, we'll probably at least update general design for the web facing docs.
Okay, so there's a new group inside of the ComCom headed up by Olivia Pup on GitHub, and she's been really pushing that forward, and that has been active over the last few months. So maybe we could see if we can add that to that group's activity.
I don't want to be rated for the docs, but I wondered a few times when I looked at our docs how well actually the PHP docs from back then, I don't know who used to be ever, but they are actually excellent. They provide like versions documentation with comments on them, with everything you would expect. So and they are like they were started in 2001 or so. I mean, it should be possible for us something similar.
Right.
Maybe
we
are steering to the conversation in
Yeah,
a non-diagnostic.
We're
The documentation is a big problem.
But yeah, so
It's
True, right.
it's probably requires a day or a summit for just to
Probably, yeah.
So
It's true.
From the APN perspective, once it would be really how the diagnostic tools that we provide are regarded can be used for production environment. Are
Nice.
regarded only for development environment.
That's a great point.
That plays exactly then also the level of testing on the library. Because for development, definitely, but for production tools, we have to have regression testing for functionality and performance. So we have seen charts today where we have seen trying to cut us down that number of requests. Heap dumps will worst case double our memory requirements for the application for time. And these are very viable information. What we would regard production ready on only development.
But yeah, let's include that as part of each of the subsections. James, do you have one last
Yeah,
one?
under the topic of testing, a slightly different direction from what we've been talking about. I've had a number of conversations regarding just validation of async hooks and validation of some of the debugging tools. Make sure they're actually hitting the use cases and meeting use cases. And several conversations that I've had, some folks question, other folks say, well, of course they do. I don't see how are we actually validating, and what set of use cases are we actually validating to? If we look at like domains, right? Well, the big problems there were partially how they were implemented, but another part of it was they didn't quite fit the use case. And there seem to be folks that are very concerned that we're going to go down the same road with async hooks. get it out of experimental, get it out there, and then suddenly, okay, there's a whole set of use cases that we're missing. How are we validating those?
One outcome could be something like what we're doing in the benchmarking. We want to come up with matrix. Here's your use case. Here's the test we have running in the CI that actually tests those use cases.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, the async hook stuff, it's on the agenda for the monitoring section, which is scheduled for after lunch. I agree with, I think, the sentiment that the correctness of async hooks is not obvious, right? And it's not always clear to somebody maybe looking at user code what the asynchronous model is, right? And I think that's, in essence, the fundamental problem. You know, I think there's some stuff we can talk about in the monitoring topic that attempts to get some form of a model around that, framing around asynchronous context that may help with some of that.
Yeah, I just wasn't sure if that was a testing thing or if it's better under monitoring than.
I think it's a key thing. You need a model that you can then write a spec for that the test should conform to.
Right,
and right now there aren't really either.
I think it's sort of this under both, because I think as a group we should still come up with this sort of validation matrix. Because across all those things, here's use cases and the tools and the validation. Like, what do we have in our CI? So you could go to, for diagnostics overall, even if there was a reference to different places, but I think to sort of keep our eye on the ball, you want somewhere you can go to and say, what's our current state of affairs in terms of testing these tools? And see the big red boxes and see the green boxes so that people can say, oh, well, I use that tool. I'm willing to write a CI job. Or, so I think that's where I would put the part of the testing. The first step may just be to identify what we'd like and where the gaps are. As concrete, as concrete as we can in terms of if you want to go do something, here's a box that's red and it's kind of obvious what you're going to do. Don't make that box be green.
I have one comment. When do we see that something is supported by Node.js and protected, which is related to data, for example? So if you continue running the versions because you want to provide just to customers, but there are some tools that are like the purpose or like the supporting policies includes the issues with post-mortem debugging. When do we say that we hold back, we update the unpaid not fixed because it's super important for our iOS goals, and which can be avoided, so do we have any consequences to that?
Well, that's a very good point. Like, when do we say that this is a blocking criterion? It's great to have it in the CI and running, but if we ignore the results, release anyway, that's not necessarily going to achieve what we want. So yeah, identifying as what we think. If us as a group say these particular tools are critical, from a diagnostic perspective, we should be making the case that no, we don't ship the next group, so we don't upgrade because these are the tools. We've got these jobs in place to know when they're being broken or not. And so yeah, I think as a group, that's on us to be the evangelists of these things are blockers, they're not working.
And of course, the avenue for that is get it into our CI. If it's breaking our CI, we cannot release.
Right. It's exactly like you have to say, what testing should we have? Okay, now do we actually have testing of that at the CI? And then the final sort of closing the loop is the releasers look at that CI as a qualifier. And I think also that we have enough feedback loop so it's not a surprise when you go to make it, right? It's can't run every single one of them in the regression, the regular regression tests. If we can, it's small enough, that's what we should do. But otherwise, like nightly ones, but then it fails there. How do we make sure to feed that back? And so yeah, I think that's definitely a key part of this.
Outcome should be on which test will be outside master. Say that it's already tested for that and CI, then more important.
Yeah, so I don't, when you say accepted, I'm pretty confident that almost any test we come up with that doesn't consume mass amount of resources, we can get running in CI.
I'm just saying that, for example, if I would just send it to for the dash pro, I don't know if I was and accepted and more people.
Right. Before we do that, we have to have it be green.
Yeah.
You'll never have the success criteria of here's my red flag.
That's what we say.
That's where we're not landing, because it'll never be red. It'll never be
say
green.
that it should be running on the CI decision process, which has
yeah.
So I think this relates to the earlier discussion about platform neutrality and the APIs. And I guess the question would be, what is our API contract with the VMs, right? So if a node user uses an experimental API and then complains that node broke them, well, we aren't going to listen. So same thing. That's the first thing you need to define, that what is the contract that we have with the VM, because that's what we need before we can add a test for it and say you must uphold this contract.
All the dash things are not contracts for
Right.
And it goes back to other things like
VM contract added to our
we have no tests on our CI that test the dtrace stuff right now. So that code is in core, it's part of core. It's been there for a long time. No coverage. We have no idea if it actually works. So that's a problem.
Yeah, I guess it's like, in that case, if nobody cares whether it works or not, maybe that's fine. But if we think it's an important thing that we want to have available to our end users, then it's not.
Yeah, if you document this, then you're essentially saying that this should officially work for you.
Yeah, so we should document things we think are important to our end users.
But then they should also be tested.
Right, I agree.
And then they can be officially contracted.
Exactly. So it's
Right.
all packaged.
Right.
Right, so that's how much. Right.
Yeah, relevant.
Again, yeah. Performance has been a challenging one in that, like, we have a whole bunch of micro benchmarks, and they go up and down, and there's so many of them, and there's always, there's the arguments of like, yeah, it went down, but this one went way up in like the real world situation. And it's also very difficult to run some of those, so we've had some pushback in terms of, well, you're just trying to slow me down by saying you have to performance is okay. We probably need to get it to the point where, like, our nightly graphs give us enough of a safety net that we think we cover the real world. So it's not, somebody put something in, it's like not proved to us. There'll always be special cases. The general case should be, well, it went in, our nightly charts didn't change, so we're okay, that it's probably okay. Or wait a sec, after the error went way down, or the web tooling benchmark went down. We better now investigate that and figure out what's going on.
We've definitely been over-indexing on the micro benchmarks. They do not present enough of a real-world picture in any sense. It became painfully obvious trying to do the benchmarks for the FS promises. It's like, yeah. The numbers we can actually get out of the micro benchmarks are nowhere near real world in any sense. Yeah. Yeah.
Looking for how to test it.
Right. That may be more for the, I'm not sure if that's something for this particular group to trace down, but that's maybe more.
I would say that those discussions would be very good to have in the benchmarking work group.
Yeah.
We don't have enough people there from the different areas participating to really get into that in any meaningful way. So this would be my pitch for, if you think you're interested and that's something you want to push, please come get involved in the benchmarking work group, because we've slowly pushed on some of these high level ones. It's not complete. But that's a tricky one that's going to take a lot of brain power to figure out where the right balance is and the right areas to make it so that we don't slow people down because of micro benchmarks, but we do have a good enough safety net so that, yeah, if you've truly broken, like, if you've truly like doubled our startup time, we should know that and figure out whether, okay, that's okay because there's a real good reason, or no, we need to revert. But yeah, that'd be my pitch to say get involved in benchmarking work. That's probably
Just a quick time check. We're about 10 minutes.
That's what I was gonna say. I think if we think these are the outcomes for those things, maybe again, this is something where we should schedule it near the end. Having gone through the context of all the rest of the discussions, we can then do some discussion on this. And if we don't get to it in the time that we have, we can put it as something that we handle offline, or end in a future summit. Okay, so I think the food should be in the little dining room over this way. I think I said 12, did I say 12 or 12:30? I can't remember.
I think it's on the latest one.
Okay, good. All right, it's note 6.
Was running the recording? Was running the recording?
It's I don't know. I don't know.
Maybe we just stop it. Hey.
Yeah, it can go in. It can go.
Yeah.
Well, we didn't have them.
We didn't test.
That's why we
So what time did you get in? Did you get any sleep?
Yeah. Oh, I guess you're not get back anymore. Yes. I was able to get sleep. That was so nice. Yeah. You were in the airport, right? So you're just in the airport.
Hope the lunch is here and we didn't miss the train.
The train.
Or whatever.
No, I haven't.
I'm gonna smooth. Getting juice all morning.
I haven't been through this one call today. Okay.
So for anybody who's been watching on the Hangout, I guess, Colin, I'm going to stop this one and I'll post a new link for the session when we start up after lunch.